Hey, and welcome to the What's in Your Data podcast. I'm Denis, your host, and today I'm joined by Jim Gavigan. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So today we will talk about Datatude, which is an interesting concept developed by Jim and his company. But before we get started, Jim, for those of you that don't know you, can you tell us a bit more about you and your company?
Yeah, so I started in the industrial business and in manufacturing in 1995. So in my 30th year, maybe coming even on the 31st, I don't even know. I think I started around the fall of 95. And really, what I started doing was vibration analysis. That was the very first thing I did after a 2 year hiatus after school because it was a really bad, time in 1993 when I graduated. But got into vibration analysis, did that for 3 months, and then I transitioned into control systems. Whole funny story with that. I won't bore everybody with that one, but it is kind of funny. But really, those first 6 years, I did everything from designing and building control panels, going in and helping them get mounted, running conduit to them. I didn't do that. I helped. Help pull wire in, hook the wires up, program the PLC, made the machine run, and often had to go work on equipment that I wasn't even familiar with. It just had some of the equipment we sold on it, and hey, it doesn't run. Come help. So there was no telling what would walk in on, right? And so it really gave me a huge base to kind of work from. I got to see a lot of different processes, a lot of different pieces of equipment, and I would put my first 6 years up against most people's 10 or 15. And just because of the variety I got to see and what all I was asked to do, because it was a lot. And then I actually got out of the engineering ranks and went into sales, went to work for Rockwell Automation as a sales engineer. Definitely realized that it wasn't just data dumping somebody about here's all the great features of a control logics. Now, don't you want to buy 100 of them, right? And they're like, well, I can't use those right now. I have a whole plant full of PLC5 and blue hose running everywhere. I'll eventually get there, but I can't do it now. And I'm like, what do you mean? These are great. Like, yeah, I know they're great, but I can't use them. And so I really kind of had to learn like why people buy things, right? And so that was a huge, lesson there. Did a little technical consulting role at the end of the Rockwell stint. Got recruited by a system integrator that I work with to be their sales and business development person. And that's where I first learned about pie. We were doing some work for a food and beverage customer, and actually they were making cattle feed. And we ended up optimizing a process that we've been fighting for quite some time, maybe like 12, 18 months. We optimized their batch process, helped them land a new customer, and they built a whole new plant. And they literally looked at us and said, hey, you guys figured out what issues we had. You know our process. You're helping us build the plant. And we had used Pi to diagnose something we've been fighting for 18 months. And I was like, wow, this is really powerful. And then when they came and asked us to build the new plant with them, I said, wow, two companies just made millions of dollars. This data thing, because I didn't know what to call it, just did that, right? And
Mhm.
so I knew there was something to it. This was like probably 2010, 11 timeframe. And then 2013, I got recruited to go to OSIsoft. I was living in the Memphis, Tennessee area at the time. So I covered two states, Tennessee and Arkansas, had some corporate accounts, and ended up moving down to Florida. Took a strategic account manager role and moved down to St. Augustine, Florida, just south of Jacksonville. And then after three bosses in 2 years, I got on one of those, we're going to fire you. I mean, performance improvement plans. So
Right.
I was on one of those, right? And so I left and went back to that system integrator, started their pie practice, realized after about 18 months that kind of need to do this on my own. I have some ideas and some things, that I want to do. And here's the thing, I'd come with a project and it's like, okay, I think this is going to take 4 or 5 weeks to complete, right? They're like, what's the schedule? I'm like, we're creating something we've never done. I have no idea. It could be 4 months. It could be 4 or 5 weeks. I don't know. Right. Because they're used to, okay, we have an outage. We have to be running again by this point. So everything works back from that. Here, it's like we're creating something out of nothing and it's not necessarily mission critical. Right. They had no concept of how this worked. Right. And there was this culture conflict, right? And so I was like, I need to do this on my own. I got some ideas. So I started Industrial Insight in December of 16. So coming up on 9 years now. And really at the time it was, how can I help people make the most out of their Pi systems? Because that was my big frustration at OSIsoft was I would go in and tell people these are all the things we're working on. Pi Asset Framework was coming of age. Pi Vision, was starting to come of age. We had built some other technologies that, were useful and nobody was using. I would go in and talk about them and I got one of two answers. Jim, that looks great. We don't have time. Jim, that looks great for somebody else. I don't know how it applies to us. And in both cases, I'm like, I literally see, because of my technical background, I see the solution in my head, right? I can see how this will help you. I don't understand how I can't make you see that. So it was really about how can I help people make the most of that, right? And then it has morphed into, we do all of that still, but we're working with other platforms. We've worked with Canary, we've worked with Data Park, we're working with Flow. Let's see who else. We're doing some advanced analytics stuff. We just signed a partnership deal with Seek. We're going to look at TwinThread. We've been doing Simca for multivariate analysis for a long time. We've been doing business intelligence work like Tableau and Power BI for probably 8 years now.
Okay.
So, really what our goal is if you have plant floor data, more than likely time series, but because we really don't do MES, but we'll pull that MES data and tie some things together, Power BI. But really from the time series data standpoint, if it touches that, we're here to help you. And we're here to fill in any gaps you have. Some customers are like, hey, I just need help on the administrative side. Others are like, I need help building solutions because I don't have people that can do that. I can manage the system, but and keep it online and, add tags and, add new users, etc. But I can't build a solution. I don't have people to do that. So we just come in wherever people are and help. And it varies with a lot of companies. So really we're here to help with all of that. We're a team of 5 right now. Probably will grow early next year, the way 26 is looking. Hopefully that, continues. It's looking pretty positive right now. Kind of working all the major industries, pulp and paper, oil and gas, chemicals, food and bev, mining, a little bit of pharma. We don't like to do all the validation stuff, so we kind of keep that to a minimum. But, probably the only one we really don't mess with is water and wastewater, and I don't really know why. We've just never really been asked. But pretty much all the others we're in somewhere or another. Power gen, we're in that one a little bit with power distribution. So, reality is it makes us pretty versatile. We work on a lot of different stuff. We see a lot of different things, and everybody has kind of the same problems. Their terminology is different. So
Yeah.
that's who we are. So.
Well, fascinating. I think me as well. I'm also mostly focused on the level 2 data from SCADA and so on. And I should mention to the listener, the way I actually got to know Jim was through our mutual friend, Lonnie Bowling from the Pi group. And he was actually my first official guest on this podcast. So now it's great to have Jim here as well.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think, Jim, for your discussion, it's obvious you have a wealth of experience with time series data. And the topic of this podcast, really, it was your new idea about Datatude. Perhaps you can, before sketching very shortly what it is, describe what the need for it is. What is the origin of the story? What's the problem?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. We've gone through, reasonably significant rebranding. We have a marketing firm called Group 5 West out of Little Rock, Arkansas that we work with. I got to give them a plug. They've been great to work with. So they deserve a lot of credit for this. But they came up with a concept. They were looking for a fun and creative way to describe things we do. And they came up with this concept of Datatude. And, at first we were all like, but then we started kind of having fun with the name. Like, you need to change your Datatude, like about whatever, right? So we were having fun with it. And we're like, it's kind of corny, but it's kind of cute, and it kind of,
it's memorable.
Yeah, it's memorable, right? And that's really what you want is it's memorable. And hopefully, a good memory, right? Hopefully it's not something like, for me, like the Geico Gecko or the Caveman. Even though I use that insurance company, I hate their commercials, right? I think they're silly, but I remember them, right? Didn't prevent me from using their stuff, right? Um, but the idea really comes from, we see so many customers are trying to build these very sophisticated systems on top of really crappy data and without all of the structure in place, right? And so I think the first real idea of that was, okay, are you even ready for that? Right. And that was kind of what the Datatude thing, I think, was all about, and kind of what they were thinking and kind of how we took it. And so we're kind of running with it.
Mhm. I think that's a very interesting point. And you mentioned data. In fact, one of my services also involves just checking if the data is even there, if it's good enough. But the way from you describe Datatude, it goes even beyond that, where data is just one of the potential axes.
Yep.
If you can now, let's say, summarize the idea, what exactly would you check to measure Datatude?
Yeah. So we're actually working on, we've kind of had a struggle sometimes because we do so much custom work, right? How can we package up things we do in a smaller chunk where it gets us in helping a customer out at maybe a lower price point? They know exactly what they're going to get. We know exactly what we need to deliver, and it's just low barrier to entry, right? And we figure out, like, do we like working with this customer? They figure out, do they like working with us? Are there other opportunities, things of that nature? So we were actually, how this, there was an idea came up of, and I think this is where you actually came up with the concept of this podcast was, well, why don't we give someone a Datatude score, right? Like,
Mhm.
what is your score for your Datatude? And so the thought process of that was, how do we build an assessment of what does that look like, right? And so I threw out a structure. I'm gonna, so if you see me looking off camera, I'm kind of, flipping through the notes. Some of the things
That's
I
fair.
think about, right, is, first is from a network infrastructure. Do you even have everything on a network where we can go get to the data, or is it
Mhm.
in a way, even if we can throw in like some kind of gateway, can we get to all the data that you care about? Right, that's a big one. From a data infrastructure side, do you have all the right systems in place? Do you have a data historian? If you're a process customer, do you have a LIMS or a quality system in place? Do you have MES? Do you have an ERP? Do you have a maintenance system, which often goes with the ERP system? And what are those systems? Are they a black box to you, or is it something we can actually get to? Culture. Is your culture even ready for being data driven, right? Operations, management, and engineering. Like, your engineering people might be, your operations people are like, no, this is the way we've always done it. Don't mess with me.
Mhm.
Management is like, hey, we want all the latest stuff, right? The operations people are like, I don't want it. Engineering's kind of like, yeah, but we want this, and like, are you even on the same page, right? Is your culture even ready? Are they starving for it?
Yeah,
Most aren't.
if I can just interrupt you and go deeper
Sure.
on that point, because that's
Yeah.
something I've also seen in my experience. You
Yep.
mentioned the different industries you're active in, like paper, oil and gas,
Yep.
manufacturing. Do you also see a very big difference in, let's say, data desire, if I can call it this way? I found that some enterprises, let's say the more metallurgical manufacturing, don't care as much about doing stuff with data than, let's say, wind energy, because they have a clear demand for it, let's say for reporting. Is that also a part of your scoring?
To a certain degree, a lot of the companies we work with, and it's so funny because they all point to the other one and say, oh, see, they got it all together. Like the pulp and paper guys will say, yeah, but we want to be more like the oil and gas guys. They got it all together. And then the oil and gas guys are like, well, we're really freaking far behind. We're looking at the power people, kind of like what you were saying. The power people are like, well, we're looking at the food and bev folks. It's so funny because it's the fear of missing out, right? FOMO.
Hmm.
Um, I think pretty much all the industries are struggling. I
Hmm.
think, there's pockets, right? I think, you mentioned, wind energy and solar, which you have a lot of the same thing. It much more lends itself,
Hmm.
to this kind of work. because you can scale it faster, but we go in a chemical plant, there's one that I'm doing some training for them and I'm working a little bit on some of the curriculum stuff. It is so that there's no other plant like it anywhere in the world. And this is one of only a few places in the world these products are even made.
Mm-hmm.
So in some cases, like how do you take those learnings and go elsewhere, right? And so sometimes industries like that kind of get stuck, especially if they don't have a ton of competition, or even if they do. Like to me, pulp and paper is one of the worst at this, right? Well, this is the way we've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
And or I don't have time. Like I am literally firefighting all day and I'm here for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And I'm getting calls in the middle of the night and on my day off.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean now you want me to work on this stuff? I don't have time, right? And I think that's a huge barrier, right? Sometimes it's not even the desire. It's just they can't imagine something different. And that's
Right.
kind of a problem. But but culturally, most industries are kind of in the same boat. As I said, they all kind of talk about a lot of the same things. The language is different. Obviously, there's little nuances to their process or their stuff, but they're all talking about some of the same things. They all have the issue of they're losing gray hair experience and they're getting a bunch of young people in and they're trying to figure out how to still survive. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of all the same. So no, I don't think one industry is better than the other.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to hear that they all have the desire. So let's focus back on the concept. You mentioned network, the systems,
Mm-hmm.
the culture. I guess data is also a very big important part of it, right?
Yeah,
Data quality.
and yeah, data quality is a big one. Cybersecurity, kind of what's their take on like semantic models, like a UNS, or if they're a Pi house, like asset framework,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. What are they thinking about for all of that? Um, and I think one of the big ones too is do they just have a lot of first principles components in place? For instance, do they have good dashboards in place to tell them even how they're performing? And if they're not
Mm-hmm.
performing well, or even if their individual processes aren't performing well, how do you tell the operator what to potentially do? Do they even have those kind of things in place from a first principle? Right? No magic to it, right? It's just if this KPI starts going up, then we know we need to twist these two knobs down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff is just it's very physics oriented, right? If this temperature goes up too high, then we know we need to do these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of companies don't really have enough of that in place to even know where to start layering in the AI or machine learning stuff because they're like they think it's the analogy of I have a hammer and therefore everybody must have a nail.
Right.
And in some places, like, no, I have a hex bolt. No, I have a Phillips head screw. No, I have, an Allen bolt. You can't just take a hammer and pound those in, right? And that's what I think a lot of management does. So our real concept is
Mm-hmm.
how can we just take a broad view of all of these things, systems, culture, and people, data quality, what do you even have in place today to figure out where are your big holes, where are your big gaps. And so that's kind of the thing I think we're going to build in the coming year is how do we do a study that's not super invasive, right? But allows us to see these kind of things and really go to leadership and tell them the things that they don't want to hear. And probably what they're going to do is they're going to crumple it up in a paper and throw it over their shoulder and go do what they want anyway. But at least when that fails, they're going to have a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're going to be able to come back to it because somebody's going to keep it and go, you remember when we had these guys in? I think they knew what they were doing. Can we go talk to them about maybe executing? And realistically, some of the stuff we're talking about here, like, it's not our space, right? We
Yeah.
actually have a customer right now or a potential customer that we think we're going to be able to test this concept on, because it's a holding company and they've got maybe 100 manufacturing plants in like 10 or 11 different like divisions, so to speak, right? Different, they've kind of bucketed them, and they're in all different kind of places, right? So
Right.
how can we get them somewhat level, right? And so I think that'll be an interesting case study. How can we take that other places, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, you mentioned management, and I don't want to bash on management in this podcast, but I can't help but notice the cognitive dissonance where you have a higher up manager at the same time complaining about not having the latest number of this month for reporting, but then at the same time considering AI to be the future of their business and making monster investments into that.
right.
So it seems we are building on a crooked foundation.
Yeah. And I'm just going to say it. I think we have a massive bubble with AI because we have all this money. I read something yesterday, a guy named Ron Hetrick on LinkedIn. He was saying something like 71% of all venture capital money is going to AI right now.
Hmm.
We've seen, I can't remember whose study was it, Yale, Harvard, MIT. I think it was MIT.
Yeah, a big one. Hmm.
Yeah, they said like 95% of all AI projects are failing. Like, not, we need to tweak it. No, they're an abject, miserable failure. And
Hmm.
yet you're hearing so many companies laying people off to go invest money in this. You have all these data centers being built. They can't even tie to the grid, so they're having to bring their own power, right? So it's a really weird thing going on right now, but no one or very few people are actually able to tie value to what they're doing with artificial intelligence today.
Yeah, I'm
You
yet
know,
to see any.
now what I will say is I'm probably the only one on my staff that doesn't use AI actively.
Mm-hmm.
Where my people use it, is, for instance, they're writing some code, like Justin was working on something yesterday and we were pushing data. He was working on Flow, which is something fairly new to us. And he was pushing data out to a SQL backend so he could do a Power BI report on some downtime for this customer. And what he then wanted to be able to do was convert it to something else, like maybe Postgres or something like that. So he used AI to say, okay, here's my SQL query. How do I make it into this other platform, whatever it was? Does it work? We're not sure yet, but it
Mm-hmm.
probably will save, a ton of time just by getting us close, right?
Yeah.
And matter of fact, Lisa from Group Five sent me a blog the other day. She put one of my videos, one of my 2 Minute on Tuesday videos that I do on LinkedIn, into, I don't know if it's Chat GPT or what, and said, hey, write a
Mm-hmm.
blog based on this video. And she took a bunch of stuff out of it, and then I read it. She sent it to me, and I read it, and I could tell it was, AI, because I saw a bunch of M dashes in it, and I'm like,
That's a giveaway, isn't it?
yeah, it's a dead giveaway. All right. And so I'm like, okay, this isn't anywhere. Well, the concepts are good. It's nowhere close to how I would say it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I rewrote it. Realistically, it took me a lot less time, and I probably would have never written it, had she not done that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that it doesn't have some use, right? But I think what people are trying to do, they think it's going to solve problems that I'm not sure it's capable of in its current
Yeah.
form. And
Yeah, I
people
fully
think
agree.
it's there. We got Sam Altman and Elon Musk saying, "Oh, we're going to be, what is it they call it, sentient or whatever." I mean, they're saying, "Oh yeah, it's going to be able to do its own thing." Like Elon Musk is like, "Yeah, we're up to about a 10% chance, that Grok's going to be able to do that." Sam Altman's like, "Oh, we're less than a year away." I heard that about Google a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
If that's going on, like, it ain't going to be public. Like, maybe our military and government know how to use it that way, but we're not getting it, and that's scary in and of itself. But what Ron was pointing out, though, was that despite all this investment, despite all these failures, no one really has figured out how to build new products, make new services, do things that really enhance people's lives with this technology. At some point, these venture capitalists are going to be like, I'm not getting my money back, because they're all giving each other money, right? It's kind of
Hmm.
like, I don't know if you ever watched the Three
Yeah,
Stooges,
like
but
a Ponzi scheme or like a pyramid scheme.
it is. There was an old Three Stooges skit, where like Curly owed Mo, $20 or something like that. And so like they end up passing this thing around to each other. It's like, well, here, you pay him and he pays you. And it's
Hmm.
like they do it. And literally at the end of the skit, they're all convinced they have settled all their debts. And all they did was pass the same note around.
Hmm.
Right. And to me, that's what's going on here. And so, my concern, is if I'm saying when all that happens, there's going to be a kind of a spirit of disillusionment out there. What are you going to do? Because you tried to take the Ozempic pill to lose the 30 pounds of weight that you want.
Hmm.
That didn't work, and it came with a lot of side effects you didn't want. Okay. Now, maybe you ought to go back to what the personal trainer told you 2 years ago, right? That you need to get your diet right and you need to, start working out, which is exactly what the report and the Datatude score is going to tell you. And what I'm afraid of is in today's environment, the executives are going to ball it up and throw it over their shoulder because they're like, that's hard. That's going to take time. I don't have that. I got to do AI today because of
Yeah,
the
I
fear.
mean, when it comes to AI, I wouldn't say like I'm trying to leverage it as much as I can. And
Mhm.
so far, what I've been doing, for example, it will transcribe this podcast. It will maybe correct the audio. It will correct
Yep.
some of my emails. And the way
Yep.
I see it, it essentially allows me to spend more time in my genius zone. Or let's
Hmm.
say a New York lawyer can spend more time billing clients for difficult work.
Yep.
In no way, shape, or form do I see AI doing the stuff that we're talking about. For example, assessing Datatude. So
Right.
I would pay $100 per month for AI. I would not pay $200. And apparently, the cost per customer at this time at OpenAI is $200. The math that doesn't check out. There's some benefit, but
Right.
nowhere near to warrant the number of VC money it's raising right now.
Yeah. And I think I think what he was saying too is the money being poured into this, it's 17 times what what went into the .com bubble, i.e. around
Mhm.
2000, 2001, and 4 times what we saw in 2008 with that real estate market and the subprime mortgages, right? We're
Right.
talking lots more money
Hmm.
involved. So it's like an even bigger bubble, right? And how long does it last before people realize maybe this isn't what it's cracked up to be? And I talked to a customer maybe a couple weeks ago,
Hmm.
and I can't talk about what industry or who it is or anything like that, but they actually were doing some really cool stuff with AI. They were empowering their people with it, right? They were allowing, because like maybe they have a central development team that's building a lot of their major solutions, right? Well, the issue, and this is kind of where we fit in a lot of times, helping customers out, is yeah, maybe the central team's taking care of the big hitters, but there's maybe they're hitting the home runs, right? If we're
Hmm.
going staying in sports analogies, but man, there's a lot of singles and doubles out there, right? That can really score a lot of runs, and those are kind of being ignored because you're trying to go for the big home runs, right, with the central group.
Hmm.
And he was telling me, he said, yeah, basically, we have some internal stuff we built that allow some of our users, like, to build some of these solutions that we can't touch as a central team because it's not worth it, but that are worth something, right? It solves problems for them and a few people around them that's actually worth money to the company. And he said
Hmm.
that's kind of how we're using it versus some whiz bang overarching thing. We're just trying to figure out how to make people more productive and more, help them do their job better. And I'm like, that's probably the right approach. And that's not anyone else is doing, or very many are doing. And I thought it was very prudent that, but I thought the concept and the thought
Mhm.
process of that was probably right.
Yeah,
So
makes sense. But let's return to before 2022 when AI was still machine learning, we still had computer vision and so on, before it
right,
all became LLMs. To me,
right.
it feels like we were working on that. We had some progress, but the progress was slow due to, well, bad data and basically not being ready. Now, instead of fixing that foundation, we just now piled up LLMs and completely forgot about the problem, and now want to do an even bigger challenge with the same problems. So, if we now return to, well, what the current problems are that we try to measure with Datatude, let's say you have someone listening here who owns a plant who thinks I want to leverage AI or VR or blockchain or even classical machine learning,
Hmm.
but is unsure of whether they can support it or not. What would be a good place to start? What systems would you have this person examine? Is it something more cultural, technological?
So the way we've handled machine learning, even in a plant or a place that doesn't have a lot of the basics in place per se, we encourage people to at least try it. Right? It's
Mhm,
not going to be the be all end all. What it will do is it'll show you gaps, and it also allows us to build out some of that infrastructure. Like we have a chemical manufacturer, the one that I was doing the training curriculum for. We've done a bunch of machine learning work for them with Simca.
mhm.
As a matter of fact, the first machine learning project I ever was a part of, and this was in 2018 or 19, it was fall of 18 is when it
Mm.
was an absolute miserable failure. It was
How
6 weeks
so?
of just, this is never going to work. It was the wrong tool, wrong algorithm, wrong company who didn't understand the problem, unfortunately. And what actually ended up happening, we built a first principles set of analytics to put on a dashboard in front of their operators where they can make a more informed decision. And it has saved them millions of dollars. It has literally been the
Mhm.
most successful from a dollar perspective project we've ever done. Was it wrong that we tried machine learning? Absolutely not. We learned a lot, right? It was a
Mhm.
failure. And we've done a lot of others. We do a lot of stuff with Simca. They have a lot of batch processes, and a lot of times, like, hey, we were running really good 2 or 3 years ago, and now we're not. Or, hey, we have this quality problem, and this is the one quality metric we've never really figured out why it happens. Generally, we kind of know if this quality metric goes bad, here are the 3 or 4 things we look at. This one we don't understand. And so, what was and in some cases we ended up having to build some infrastructure to get the data lined up where we could do that analysis. And what I tell people when we start doing machine learning projects is sometimes we get no problem found.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget the one that really taught me this was for it was for the old Verso paper plant up in Androscoggin, Maine, before they blew up their digester, so I can talk about them. We had just learned Simca and come back, and I was like, man, I really want to like try to go solve a problem. And so I messaged the operations manager up there, and I said, Joe, I said, we just learned this new tool, and I want some practice. And we're not super busy at the moment. Do you have a problem we could go try this out on? If we find something, we'll work out some financial compensation. If we don't find anything, you owe me nothing. I just
Mhm.
I just want the practice, right? Or want us to get the practice. He's like, great. He goes, we have this apparent density problem, and I can't remember what apparent density is on the paper machine. It's a quality metric.
Mhm.
And he said, yeah, we had this we had this change happen right around this particular date. And you could do a QSUM chart and see, like, yep, that was the bottom of it, and
Something
now it's
happened.
been going up ever since, right? And you're like, okay, yeah, this is definitely a problem. So I use Simca, and that's kind of a classical case, right? Is you get data for like that point onward, versus that point rearward and say what's mathematically different between these two data sets, right? You got to line everything up the right way. And what I told him is, I don't see anything on the paper machine itself. You haven't changed anything, reasonable. Because I was lining up grade run versus grade run, right? Like,
Right.
okay, here's this grade that you ran, and the apparent density was good. Here's that same grade run or set of grade runs with it bad. Mathematically, they're reasonably close. There's nothing that shifted at the same time. So then we started going to the pulp mill, and I told them from the jump, I said, look, if I find something and you're like, I can't control that, or that's correlative, but it's not couldn't be causal, just tell me to
Right.
throw it out of the model, right? Like you're allowed to call BS. Like I'm not going to be that guy that's shoving stuff down your throat, like a lot of data scientists who don't understand the process or don't try to understand the process, right? You got to help me with that part, right? And you're not going to insult me. So, we went through it, went back to the pulp mill, looked in the pulp mill. Did anything shift over that time? No. So we didn't find anything. But then I started asking them, well, what about things that you're not collecting? Right. So, for
Hmm.
instance, you have a big pile of wood chips in a paper mill, right? Okay, the stuff you're cooking in your digester, are they from the top of the pile or the bottom of the pile? It's been rained on and sitting at the bottom of the pile for 30 days. They'll cook different, right? I'm not a paper maker,
Hmm.
but I know they'll cook different, right? Yeah, they definitely cook different. Well, do you know which one you were doing when? No. What about like on the paper machine? Do you know if you've changed like felt supplier or wire supplier or chemistry or anything like that? Didn't have data on all this stuff or couldn't get to it easily, i.e., why we go to ERP and MES and other systems, right? Because hey, maybe they changed their clothing supplier or felt supplier on the paper machine back right before this QSIM thing happened. We couldn't get to that data easy to start correlating it.
Hmm.
So we got to the end of that and we literally had no problem found. There was nothing in the data that they were collecting that told us here's why the shift happened. What I was convinced is it was data that they weren't collecting or that we couldn't get to that was really the problem. And
Yeah.
so now all of a sudden you start layering AI on this, right? And you kind of have the same problem. So what we try to encourage customers to do is that's not a worthless endeavor. It teaches them here's the kind of stuff we're going to have in play if we want to do this quickly because we show them all the groundwork we're having to build to get to that,
Hmm.
right? To even be able to do this, here's all the stuff I had to do with your data to make it ready for something like this. So if you want to be able to scale something out, we got to do
Hmm.
this in spades, right? So I always encourage people, let's go give it a try, right? Let's go see what we can do. With the LLMs, I'm a big fan of why don't we do small language learning models? Why don't we take all your
Mm.
documentation, all your trouble cause correction documents, all of your operator documents, how you run your facility. We could easily build an LLM or SLM, small language model, and make a Teams chatbot. A couple of my guys did that for some Pi stuff, right? How to upgrade a Pi system. They took 7 or 8, you know, Pi system documents, did training on it, built a chatbot in Teams, and now I can ask that, hey, I'm going from this version to that version. What do I need to do? And it'll give me the list of instructions and cite where in each manual it found it.
I mean, that's
Perfect.
great, right? And even regardless of outcome, in this case, it worked. But even if it doesn't work, that's one thing I appreciate about this AI wave is that it really forces companies to do more with their data, to collect data. Because I don't know how it was in the US, but I'm mostly based in Europe, working for
Right.
German companies. And
Right.
up to not so long ago, there was really an attitude like, yeah, but why do you need this data for? And at least now they fool themselves into, well, we need data for AI. Whether AI will work out or not remains to be seen, but hopefully after a couple of years, at least they would have a proper data infrastructure.
Yeah. I think AI is going to play a part, right? It's not going to be as big a part as what a lot of people think. right? It is a tool in the tool belt. It is not a be all end all. I mean, just 5 years ago, everybody was saying machine learning was going to do all this, and it didn't either, right? It's a
And
tool
before
in the
that was
tool.
big data.
Yeah, and big data. Yeah, digital twin. Like, throw all these terms out, right? They just keep, you know, kind of moving the goalpost, right? But the reality is, it's just like when we were talking off camera, right? You can't go to run a marathon and you've been sitting on the couch eating chips for the last year, right? You can't just
Mhm.
get off the couch and go run 26 miles tomorrow, right? There's a process. There's base level things you have to build to do that, right? I've been on a fitness journey for the last 4 years, 5 years, right? I'm about to turn 55. I hurt myself playing golf of all things. I got a bulging disc in my neck from hitting so many golf balls because I was trying to break 70 by the time I was 50.
Mhm.
What happened is I had a weak left shoulder from an old injury, an old torn rotator cuff injury that finally reflected back into my neck. And I'm like, I hurt myself playing golf of all things. And so I was like, well, that's never going to happen again. And so I started, working out, and consistently. And the thing is, though, like some of the stuff I do now, there's no way I could have done now or could have done then what I can do now, right? Because I have 4 years or 5 years worth of base, to work from, right? So I can do more challenging things. And I think a lot of companies, they still, because of the culture that we all live in, right? The investment culture, here in the States, the Wall Street culture, it's, what have you done for me lately? What about
Quarterly
next quarter?
profits.
Yeah, it's all quarterly, right? So it's like, oh, you only made 1.1 bajillion dollars last quarter. You were supposed to make 1.2, so therefore we're selling, right? And then all of a sudden their stock plummets, and you're like, well, didn't they still make a bunch of money? Aren't they going the right direction? Yeah, but they don't know their business. They only made 1.1 bajillion. They should have made 1.2, like they said. And what ends up happening is we get all this short-term thinking, we get a lot of fear of missing out stuff going on, and we get the situation where people want AI now. Yeah.
All right, so there was a small hiccup in my connection. Apologies for that. Jim was just explaining about the short-term vision of the industry.
Yeah, and so what I was saying when Dennis like got jettisoned there was these companies want AI now, right? Because they have this very short-term quarterly kind of a focus. And I was saying about this during the break. Simon Sinek, he wrote I think it was a book he wrote called The Infinite Game. And the concept is with companies, what you're really trying to do is just survive long term, right? There is no winning, there is no losing, there is no like scoreboard, right? Like baseball, you play 9 innings, there's a scoreboard. Football, you play four 15-minute quarters, there's a scoreboard,
Hmm.
right? There's a way to keep score, there's a defined end to the game, there's a defined rules to the game, right? With companies, it's really not, right? It's an infinite thing. You're trying to, stay in business, survive, and grow and thrive and all that, right? And I think so many companies are driven by they think it's a finite game, right? And realistically, the things we're looking at is very much why I use the analogy all the time. It's the fitness analogy, right? It's not like, okay, I can bench press 500 pounds or I can run a marathon in under 2.5 hours. I won. You're doing it more for longevity and quality of life, right? It's not a game that you win like, oh, I mean, yes, you set goals along the way for sure, right? I mean, like, first half marathon I ran, I wanted to run in under 2 hours. I did. Right before I strained a calf, I felt like I was going to run a half marathon. I was going to run the St. Jude in Memphis. I thought I was targeting 145. Now, did that mean I really won anything? No, I was very slow compared to the fastest runners in the race, but it would have been a win for me, right? And why was I even doing all that? Was to try to stay in shape because I sit all day,
Hmm.
right? That's really, and so I was able to like put a goal with something really I'm trying to do for my long-term longevity. And I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about today needs to be looked at, differently. This is a long-term investment you're trying to make. And too many companies are like, well, I want to do this now. I want to do it yesterday. I want to, and here's the big issue I see is it feels like what's going on is a lot of companies are trying to replace people with these kind of systems. And maybe some of it is we have boomers retiring and we don't have as big of a population coming in, right? That may be part of it. But it feels like they're even trying to take the place of the ones that are coming in to replace. So, okay, every company lays off 25% of its workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Then what? Who's going to buy your products? Because we're going to have a crashed economy.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the reasons why I just try to focus on a lot of the basics is because even if, the technologies change and advance, you still have to have this foundational layer to be able to apply them and use them, no matter what it is, whether it's an LLM, machine learning, or something, quantum computing, whatever goes with that. You're still going to have a solid foundation and a solid base of quality data, accessible to you in a way that people can do something with it or systems can do something with it. And almost no company has that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the definition of having what is a good digital infrastructure, it seems that after decades we are not fully converged on one idea yet. I saw a lot about the unified namespace, but even that has its shortcomings, right? Especially in the process industry, where it's mostly time series. I kind of get them,
Yeah.
let's say, leaders who are confused. Okay, fair enough, but then what should we build? What can you tell about that?
Yeah. And that's one of the things. There's I want to say it's Ryan Hill. He had written this book about how to leverage AI in a modern manufacturing space, and he was talking about you have to have, it's not really unified namespace, but a common data model,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I sent him a message. I'm like, okay, where can I go build this common data model today? Like, what product can I go buy that allows me to do that? And he kind of admitted there really isn't one. He's built components of it with some of the tools he's used over the years. I could say the same thing, right, with some of the Pi Asset Framework stuff we've done, but it's only a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nobody really today that I see that allows you, and I think there's some people working on it for sure. I mean, that to me is where, a company like Flow, company like HighByte or Litmus Automation, they're trying to allow you to build these type of data models and let the data stay where it's at.
Right.
Right? Because one of the shortcomings with the Pi system, we were kind of talking about this yesterday when Justin was showing us everything he had done with Flow for this customer. I was kind of asking him and Ben, like, what do you guys really think of this? Because here's how I think of it, and I'm like, we go in the right direction, and they're like, yeah, I mean, because it's like really difficult to do some of the stuff we're doing here. Like, yeah, could it be better? Like, yeah, but they recognize like we need to rewrite this GUI.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be easier. But they're like, we can't do some of this stuff with any other technology because one of the problems we see, like with, because what Justin was able to do was, I want to pull data. They had an ignition historian, and they had an MES system that was homegrown. I think it was homegrown. It was SQL based.
Right.
And so he had to grab data from both of those, put them in a hierarchical structure, do some calculations, then push the results of those out to Power BI, like looking at downtime, for instance, because they couldn't have one way to do that. So, the thing is that, like, could we have done that in, say, a Pi system? Well, the problem with Pi is you have to bring everything into Pi to use those kind of tools.
Mm-hmm.
It can't bring data from multiple sources, right? And so I think that's why what Flow, Litmus, HighByte, and some others are trying to build is actually pretty important, because you can leave the data where it is, but then build this model, to kind of organize the data, not just plant wide, but potentially company wide, enterprise
Mm-hmm.
wide, right? Because I don't think there's really a product to do it today.
No, there's some things
Not
moving, but for example, Edge Lake is an open source data lake that keeps everything located where it is.
right.
But even that, it's also new. I don't know any finished solution either. Even Databricks, which has been growing tremendously, still needs all the data in the cloud, which is a huge journey to complete.
It's a big journey to complete, and it's got to land in context, or you've got to be able to contextualize it,
Yeah.
right? Because the thing is, if you go look at, say, a data historian, really of any kind, more times than not, they've named the tags in such a way that only the process control people understand
You're
it.
right.
Somebody counting isn't going to understand it. Like, yeah, that's the totalized flow and tells you what you produced out of this particular unit yesterday.
Hmm.
But it may or may not be named such. It's FQI123.pv. And it's like, well, okay, the process engineer is like, okay, FQI means it's a flow and it's a totalized
Hmm.
indicator, right? But then they have to know, well, what does 123 mean, right? Oh, well, let me get the P&ID drawings out if I don't know that area of the facility. And what's going on is you get higher up the food chain, in especially if the people in those seats didn't come up through the ranks, they have no idea that that's really how things work under the hood.
Yeah.
They have no idea, right? You get somebody who's, CEO level, and they started out in one of the facilities and worked their way up, you got a chance.
Hmm.
But a lot of those folks aren't. A lot of people in the CEO roles didn't necessarily come from that
Not
industry,
anymore.
don't necessarily understand the industry, especially not at a deep level, right? They're just business people. They have MBAs and they know how to move things around, close plants, consolidate things and not lay people
Hmm.
off. I'm being very facetious here, but I'm not trying to beat them up, but they don't have that deep level of knowledge of how do all of their manufacturing facilities even work and what's really important. And yet they're making these big decisions on what we need to do
Hmm.
without something like, can we even do it in place? And depending on culture, you may have a situation where you have a bunch of yes men telling us, yes, we can go do that, no problem. And then they go yell at people down the chain, like, why isn't this
Yeah,
happening?
why isn't it working?
It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, it's like you guys have no idea, right? And I think, to kind of tie it back together, I think that's why the idea of this Datatude score is important, or Datatude score is important, because we're trying to give these companies a realistic assessment of where they're at in their journey, where are their shortcomings, where are their holes, and realistically, we're not going to be the company that fulfills many of these holes
Hmm.
potentially. They may have massive holes in a quality. Matter of fact, we were helping a company, fairly small facility, part of a larger organization. They don't have a limb system.
Right.
We built kind of a poor person's limb system in their pie system,
Hmm.
and it took way longer because pie's not a limb system.
Hmm.
you know and is it ideal? No, but we're trying to help them justify, hey, we need to be able to have one of these. They were keeping it in a spreadsheet, and then they couldn't equate things and weren't able to catch problems before they got out the door, right? Well, now they're going to be able to see things a lot more clearly. The reality is, sometimes companies don't even realize, like, that's the very thing that is holding them back.
Hmm.
And so, like, if they come to us and say, hey, we need to put in a limb system, okay, we'll go talk to some of our customers on what they've done, but we're not the ones to put that in and manage it for you. That's not our area of expertise.
Hmm.
But what we need to be able to do is help them identify, like, hey, this is a really big gap compared to other companies like yours, and this is how they use it, and this is how they use it to drive better quality products out the door first time, right? So it might not even be things we even touch, and that's okay. That's okay with us. It's really about, how can we show people, here are the gaps you have in the things that you really want to get done, and maybe reduce some of the fear of missing out. I would love for, and I think some customers are doing this, I would love for some of them to say, you know what? Yeah, I know AI is all the rage, but we're not even close to ready for that. Let's get some of this fundamental work done.
Hmm.
We're going to be paying ourselves, along the way. Yeah, we'll experiment with some AI things. Like maybe we'll take, for instance, I think one of the easiest barrier to entries is take their documentation and put it in a small language learning model, and then they can claim, "Hey, look, we're using AI. Look, it's helping our
Yeah, the
operators."
low hanging fruit.
Yeah, it's low hanging, right? It's not some whiz bang thing that's gonna cost you a ton of money. Like we literally have a food customer with us right now who did a big project with one of and they have AI in the name of their company,
Hmm.
and it was a miserable failure. And they're like, you know what? We need to go back to basics. We need to have all these dashboards. We need to understand and be able to educate people on how to use data the right way first, and then maybe we can pursue that. And we kept trying to tell them the whole time,
Yeah,
but they wouldn't
but
listen.
companies have to play the game as well, right? For example, at my current client, budget is being cut for maintenance of an existing system, but then again, there is more budget available for a new big AI project. So now some people are stuffed under that. So it's basically you put it from one pocket to the other pocket. But unfortunately, managers also have to play understand that AI is the big storm now. That's the way to get your project funded. So in some sense, they have to pander to the top, so to speak.
Well, and the thing is if you don't have an AI strategy, if you're a publicly traded
Mm,
company,
yeah,
right? The stock markets look
it's
down
gonna
on you.
punish you. Yeah,
They're going to punish you. They're not going to invest. Oh, you're not investing, 14 bajillion dollars in AI. Well, maybe we should sell our investment in you because you're not going to be here.
hmm,
When it may be the most prudent decision, they've ever made. But do you think a CEO's got the courage to do that? No, because the board of directors will
yeah,
fire them.
exactly. He's not omnipotent.
And we're in that. I mean, our culture is so much this fear of missing out, right? We everybody wants to keep up with everybody else. And, like my wife and I were talking over dinner last night, and she's like, I just don't understand why we're doing this. And I said, well, here's the reality, is if one country is not pursuing it, like let's say the United States isn't pursuing these kind of technologies, well, we know our enemies, China and Russia are,
Hmm.
right? Fear of missing out. And I said, it's the same for every company. It's like if I'm XYZ paper company and I'm not pursuing this, then, ABC and DEF paper companies are doing it. And if they do it, they may pass me and leave me in the dust. So I've got to go do it.
Hmm.
It's definitely this culture of fear of missing out. And I don't know that it ends
Yeah,
well.
I mean,
I really don't.
yeah, fair enough. I mean, I'm not against trying to invest in AI and getting it to work because there is a small chance it may pay off big. I think
Sure.
what you and I are against is like doing it too quickly and not doing the foundational work, skipping all the getting healthy, cleaning up your diet, exercising regularly. It's as you say, getting off the couch from eating your bag of chips to running a marathon and then spraining an ankle and making an expensive mistake,
Right. Or worse. Yeah.
or even worse.
Or worse.
There's one more thought I had
Yeah. And
just to finish it about
go ahead.
you mentioned people and culture, and you mentioned indeed that a lot of companies try to leverage or make AI the thing that is gonna reduce headcount, not only senior people, but also unfortunately people coming in, and especially Gen Z really feels this. And I think it's so sad because a lot of the power of analytics is when you have experienced people who are passionate about the data, have business knowledge, have experience, use it and build something with it. And it feels that we are
Yes.
eliminating that very thing that adds a lot of value to this industry. Is that also how you see it?
Absolutely. I see it that way. And that's where, I mean, I feel like we kind of fill a little bit of a gap, there, because what I'm seeing with so many companies is they've lost so much
Mm,
experience over the last, really since COVID. So many, boomers have either through layoffs or just, I'm done. they see the writing on the wall and they're like, you know what, I'm taking my toys and going home.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
done. And the the problem we're seeing is what's replacing them. This is the typical scenario, right? So let's say senior process engineer at plant A says that, hey, I'm hanging up my cleats in a year,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh, we better extract all the knowledge we can out of them. They hire some young gun engineer. Young gun engineer works under, this person. Okay, that goes well. Okay, they're not going to pour. I mean, it's like trying to pour a 5 gallon bucket into a thimble. It doesn't matter how fast you pour, only so much is going to get in a year,
Yeah.
right? You can't take 25, 30 years of knowledge, especially if you're not trying to build digital tools that are really capturing this knowledge, right? Nobody really thinks of that. And what then ends up happening is now this, the engineer, the old experienced engineer goes away, has no interest in contracting back in, or is like, yeah, I'll work 10 hours a week or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, at twice the rate they were making or 3 times, right? Now this young engineer all of a sudden has done some really cool things. Well, they either get promoted within their own company, one, or two, worse, they get recruited outside the company
Mm-hmm.
and they leave. Now, not only have you lost the experienced person, but your young person who learned from them is gone.
Yeah.
Now you hire the next person in who has no experience and no download, and you haven't built systems that help them troubleshoot what the other two knew. That's where we're at. And it's there was a guy probably 7 or 8 years ago was talking to me about this, and he said, Jim, he goes, we have to do all of this. We have, because he was seeing the writing on the wall. We have all these people retiring. He said, we have to build these kind of systems before the emperor has no clothes, and he's about half naked now.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a statement at Aviva World last year. I said, well, if he was half naked 7 or 8 years ago, he's down to his underwear and skivvies now. And skivvies, which is a funny name for
Right.
underwear, right? Funny old slang word for underwear. And so I'm like, we're almost at a point where you can't get to that. And we're seeing it at one of our facilities. We're doing some multivariate work trying to figure out what's going on in a batch process. Who's driving it? The retired engineer who's getting paid probably twice what or 3 times what he used to get paid, but he's only interested in working so much, right?
Yeah, of
Otherwise,
course.
he's fishing. It's like I'm done with this. I'm not traveling to the plant. I've moved up here. I'm on this river and I'm going trout fishing regularly, right? I'm not
Yeah,
coming
which is
back.
fair enough, right? Mm.
And yeah, and I mean he's earned it. And the thing is, it's interesting is we cannot get the young engineers to dig into it. They're like, I don't need that. I don't have time for that. I'm too busy fighting fires. And we're like, dude, if you don't have this, like you have no chance.
Mm-hmm.
And like we cannot get them interested in looking at it. And what's interesting is when this fellow was at the facility, the first time I ever met him, I was showing him Pi event frames and I'd thrown some stuff into Power BI to allow them to compare batches. And he's like, well, why do I need that? Because I have Pi batch view. See, I have all the views. And I said, let's see, I'll call him Charles. His name's not Charles. I'll call him
Mm-hmm.
Charles. Charles, I'm not building these solutions for you. I'm building it for who comes behind you.
Yeah.
I got to give them a chance. I gotta get all your knowledge out of that into something like this where they have a chance. And what was interesting is we did some Simca work for him about 3 or 4 years ago, where I was doing that work, and I found the same stuff he found, except I had a decent amount of the foundation. I had to build some other analytics for some of the things he was thinking about that he was seeing going on. I built those, put them in the event frames, and then used that in my Simca analysis. It took me about 3 days, and I'm like, here's what I see. I see these things are the reason why your batches are running slower at times than you're not. And he said, well, you just figured out in 3 days what I've been staring at for 3 weeks, and I've got 30 years experience and you don't.
Mm.
So it was nice that it validated what each other was seeing, right? He was glad to see, like, hey, I used a modern tool to validate his thought process. And I was glad that I was able to take his 30 years of knowledge and his three weeks of looking that validated what I found. And as I told you, we also find a lot of no problem founds, right?
Hmm.
So we don't always find something. I would say about half the time we're reasonably successful. Maybe 10 to 20% of the time we find something like this where it's a slam dunk. But it was really nice, that we were able to find that. And he was literally a year from retirement. So he's a big fan of the stuff. He was the one that called us about this particular process as a
Hmm.
retiree, saying, "Hey, they're asking me to look at this. I know this tool you have works. Help me figure this out faster."
Yeah.
Right. And so it was nice to kind of see that, hey, here's this guy that typically is well, I've always done it this way. I don't need that. Right. Is now kind of like, hey, I actually see the value in this. We can't get the young person to look at it. How weird is that? Right. But I think the thing we see pretty consistently is that a lot of retirees are just they're gone, and the people that have replaced them don't have nearly the experience. So actually, it makes it even harder. You don't have the foundation, you don't have the institutional knowledge,
Yeah.
as you were talking about, to where we can use that institutional knowledge with these great tools to solve a problem better, faster, and put it to bed completely forever. And now you have very inexperienced people who are like, well, I don't even know what good even looks like.
It's a big problem. No, I fully agree. And that in that sense, I see AI as a risk. But if you would take, let's say, the key points of this conversation and give advice to, let's say, a plan manager listening, I think from our discussion, we can definitely say that, fine, if you want to risk experiment with AI, go ahead and do it, especially if it gives you more budget for your important work. But in doing that, do
Right.
not forget to build your solid foundations that we discussed under your Datatude, namely networks, systems, data, and also culture.
Culture.
And in terms of
Yeah.
culture, makes sense that you don't replace the young people because you're going to need them anyway. You won't have your boomers or experienced people forever. Is there anything you would add to this list, Jim?
No, and I tell them just to take a balanced approach, right? So yeah, we can do this AI thing, but just realize that 70% of that effort or more is building your foundation,
Hmm.
right? And let's be very smart at what we target, right? If and be very specific at what we target. When we do some of the machine learning stuff, like we've counseled people for years now. Let's be very specific. Let's not take thousands of variables and a very broad problem. No, let's get very
Yeah, like
specific.
low hanging fruit.
You
Solve
know,
something simple.
because it's going to get really muddy. Well, I mean, that's what happens when you throw a lot of data at something. It just gets muddy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden these correlations. Matter of fact, I have a funny slide. Where it'll be something like the amount of milk consumed in North Carolina versus the number of lawyers in
Hmm.
Australia, and they're like a 1-to-1 correlation.
Yeah.
They have zero to do with it, right? That's the kind of stuff that shows up when you build out these massive things, right? So I just tell people to be very targeted and focused. I'm still of the opinion, like, there's two ways you can do these projects. You identify a very common problem across all your facilities, like if you're at the corporate level. And I learned this from Jonathan Alexander at Albemarle, right? He's got a small team. He had to go after a very similar problem across every facility,
Yeah.
right? Like, I have to kind of solve the same problem because I have a small team.
Hmm.
If I want to get budget and get attention and get what I need done, I have to go after a problem that everybody kind of has. Like, I take a little broader brush and go after something, right? Whereas we are much more specific and narrow. And so, like, you can do it one of two ways. Like, if it's a plant manager, I'm like, be specific and narrow. Let's go very deep with the technology stack, right? Let's build all the foundations. Let's, build first principles dashboards. Let's build, business intelligence tools. Let's use some of the advanced analytics tools, machine learning, AI, whatever we want to choose. Let's use it all on that problem, and then you'll kind of see like what needs to be applied where. Like, oh, here we have this problem over here. We can just do this base level stuff, and it'll solve that problem. But hey, here's this problem that's been plaguing us for 20 years, and we never have figured it out despite having good first principle stuff. Maybe we need to throw these advanced tools at that. Yes. Where they kind of learn like, where can I apply the right tool at the right time? So it kind of depends on like the lens. Plant manager, narrow, go deep, right? Corporate level, you probably have to be a little bit more broad with your thinking. Like, what is a common problem that this kind of technology could help us with? To me, like the whole documentation and training, operators to do things better. Like, to me, that's a perfect AI use case because language models do work.
Right.
They can scan documentation in the written word and summarize it for us and give us curated content back when we prompt it the right way. That's perfect, right? If you give it crappy data, I mean, I actually saw this, and here's where I think a potential problem could be: is these models are very confident, even if they give you the wrong answer.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I shot a video about this. It was a 2 minute on Tuesday video, and I have the video evidence that this happened because I didn't believe it. Somebody posted on LinkedIn, and I didn't believe it, so I went out and did it. So I shot a video on it. But the simple question was, does water freeze at 26 degrees Fahrenheit? And Google's AI said, no, it does not. It freezes at 32. Therefore, at 26 degrees, it's liquid. And it doubled down on that answer twice. Yeah. It said it twice. It was a very, very confident wrong answer. So if you give an operator a very confident wrong answer, it can lead to a very serious industrial accident. And I think that my prediction is that'll happen, and that will put the brakes on a lot of this. Because if you give somebody a very confident wrong answer and then we have a really bad industrial accident over it, like, then people are finally going to start looking at ethics.
Yeah, but it'll be too late by then.
Right. But if you have good documentation, right, this could actually be super powerful, where the operator's like, hey, this is what's going on in the process. They ask a chatbot, what do I do? Like, I see this potential thing happening, or even better yet, the process is starting to recognize, hey, we've seen this pattern before. Here's what's likely to happen, and here are the knobs you need to twist, and here's how hard you need to twist them. Right? Where it's a little bit easier for them, and maybe it doesn't do it for you, because in some cases you can, but because I've been doing that with neural nets for a long time, especially like in the oil and gas space, we see a lot of advanced process control. But even if you don't want to go that far, where it at least gives you those suggestions where the operator's like, okay, I can do one of these three things, and here's the potential outcomes I can choose, right? Versus, I'm the least experienced operator. I've only been running this process for 6 months. I've never seen this particular scenario, and now I've got to call my supervisor, who is at home with his cell phone on his chest.
Yeah.
Or they got the phone in the other room and they can't even get a hold of them, so they make a wrong decision, right? I think those are the kind of places where AI can actually be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I mean, use LLMs for language. That's what they're built for, right? Not for logic or big decisions.
It doesn't seem like that's where a lot of people want to go, and I think it's an easy win. So if I'm a plant manager, I'm looking for that, and I've even counseled, not necessarily a plant manager, it's actually a director level guy, but he's kind of focused in this one plant. I'm like, if you want a win with AI this year, here is something I think we can do where you can claim that victory. Do you have a spot where we could do something like that? Right? Then you can claim that victory. See, look at what we did, and look at what the benefit.
Yeah, we're an AI company now.
Right, exactly. Right? You can make that claim. Regardless of, it was a really simple and quick win, but we found the appropriate place to use this tool, and it's going to save us money, right? So therefore, we want to do these other things.
Yeah.
that's what I counsel people to do. And in so doing, when you do stuff like that, you realize like, well, how good is our documentation? Is it even good enough,
Oh yeah, that's a whole
to
different
be
pair of
curious,
sleeves, right? Isn't good enough.
right? So but again, we're back to this basic, right? Oh, I want to go build this LLM that helps my operators. Well, if your documentation sucks
Yeah, if you only have
and
garbage
you're
in, you can always put garbage out. Yeah.
correct, right? Like somebody sent me their TCCs last week. We've built this whole TCC solution both in Data Park and in Pi, and they sent it to me, and I'm like, okay, here's this scenario, and you're telling the operator to do this particular operation. Well, what does that even mean?
Hmm.
How do they know they've done that? Right? What tags are involved? Like, what is that procedure? What does that even look like? Right? Because it was like these two sentences. I'm like, I have to be a super experienced operator to even understand what you're telling me. And more than likely, a really experienced operator already knows what to do. This doesn't help them at all. And there's not nearly enough information to help a young operator
Yeah.
because it doesn't tell you what does that even mean. And those are the kind of things that, I think so many companies like don't realize is like we don't have the basic stuff to be able to build these incredibly great solutions on top of, and yet they want it fast now, and they want it to work, and that's why I think a lot of them are failing.
Yeah.
So
So the solution is to indeed start small with something concrete, focus on the basics. They're important and they still need
yeah,
work. And don't forget about your future, which is the people and the culture. Oh yeah.
for sure. And and the reality is, like I told this guy, I said, here's the thing: you could scale that out really quickly to every plant, very quickly,
Hmm.
as long as you have the same level of documentation. Like that's literally something we could do small that would scale really well.
Yeah, makes sense. Jim, this was great. It was a great conversation. Before I let you go,
Yeah,
can you
thanks.
tell me a bit more about, let's say people want to know more about you or your company. Where can they find more information?
Yeah, so a couple places. We do quite. I do a ton of posting on LinkedIn. I
That's
mean, I
true.
do a 2 minute on Tuesday video that sometimes is a 6 or 7 minute video if I'm really ranting. But you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Jim Gavigan. We have a LinkedIn YouTube. I mean, a LinkedIn company page. We have a YouTube channel. Just look for Industrial Insight. Obviously, our website, industrialinsightinc.com, is a good place to find some information about us and some of my pontifications over the years. There's a lot of my old blogs, which I probably ought to go back and reread and refresh, after 6, 7, 8 years, because I bet they still
Yeah.
apply, just different technology on top now, right? But yeah, those are the common places to go find us. Is those kind of
Yeah.
places. I don't participate in. I mean, we have a Facebook page, but it's the same stuff you'll see on the other pages.
Hmm.
So
We'll put the links below in the show notes.
sounds great.
All right. Well, in that sense, Jim, I want to really thank you a lot for this conversation. I really like the fact that we
Absolutely.
had something concrete at the end.
Yeah.
That's always
Yeah.
good. And yeah, I'll put the links below. And also thank you to the dear listener, of course, for giving us the time to listen. And yeah, I guess we'll see you in the next episode of What's in Your Data. Thanks, Jim. Good to have you.
Yep. Thank you. Take
All right, take
care.
care.